Welcome back to part 2 of the West Yorkshire Spinners Springtime Blanket Knit Along. I am Chloe Elizabeth Birch, the designer of this blanket, and here to introduce you to part 2 and what we'll be making next. If you haven't already, you can download the free pattern on the West Yorkshire Spinners website, and you're all ready to get started. This week we'll be making the next 4 panels. Starting with the hyacinth ones here, we will make 2 of these. For these panels we'll be learning a new stitch this week, which is the bobble stitch. I'll be showing you how to do this later in the video. Then going on to make the bluebell panels. We have 2 different versions of these. The short one at the top, and the longer sideways panel here. Each motif is knitted using colourwork, either by Intarsia or Fair Isle, with some sections embroidered afterwards using Swiss darning. If you'd like a recap on how to do any of these techniques, feel free to go back and rewatch part 1. First in part 2 we will work the 2 hyacinth panels. This panel is made up of 1 chart. You will start working up the stem section in Fair Isle. For these sections I've used separate balls of each colour for either flower to avoid long floats between the 2 flowers. Going into the flower section I used Intarsia, having a small ball of each colour for each section to avoid floats altogether. In this section we will also be working the bobble stitch at the same time. Here's a quick look at how to do this. As you can see here, I have worked up our hyacinth panel to the first row of our bobble stitches. You can see on the back of the work I have used separate balls and worked stranded Fair Isle for the stem section, and then changed to working in Intarsia for the main flower, with 5 total balls in work. The bobble stitch is worked on the right side row. To create the bobble, work as follows into the next stitch. I'm going to knit into the next stitch as usual, placing my needle to go into the stitch from the front to back, wrapping my yarn around the needle and pulling through. Now rather than finishing the same stitch as usual, I am instead going to work back into the same stitch again, this time placing my needle through the back loop of the stitch. Again I am wrapping my yarn around the needle and pulling through. I have now made 1 stitch into 2. Once again I am not going to finish the stitch. Instead I am working back into the same stitch again, working through the front loop this time, wrapping my yarn around the needle and pulling through. Now we've made 1 stitch into 3. Now I'm going to finish this by pulling off the initial stitch from the left hand needle. And now we have worked our bobble increase. We are now going to turn the work to the wrong side. I am going to work along these 3 same stitches and purl 3. Again, I am now turning the work and going back to the right side. Working in these same 3 stitches again, I am first slipping the first stitch onto my right hand needle. Then I am knitting the next 2 stitches together. Finally, I am passing the first slip stitch over the stitch we've just made. This is decreasing our 3 stitches back into 1 and finishing the bobble. And this is how you create the bobbles. Now I'll show you this again on our next bobble. Again, working into the next stitch, I'm working to the front, then the back, and the front again of the next stitch, increasing 1 stitch into 3. Now I have done this, I am turning the work to the wrong side. And working across these same 3 stitches again, I am purling 3. Now turning the work again to the right side. I am slipping the first stitch, then knitting the next 2 stitches together. Finally, I am passing the slipped stitch over the stitch we've just finished, making our 3 stitches back into 1. And our second bobble is complete. You will work each bobble in this way. Now I have finished our first hyacinth panel, and you can see how our bobble stitches have created this 3-dimensional texture. Once your panel is complete, you will then pick up the side edges in shade F to work the garter stripes at either side to finish the border. Next in part 2 we will work the 2 different bluebell panels, as shown here in the blanket. The first bluebell panel is made up of 1 chart, working the vine section in stranded Fair Isle. The bluebell buds are embroidered afterwards using Swiss darning. Once your panel is complete, you will then pick up the side edges in shade E to work the garter stripes at either side to finish the border. The second panel is worked using 3 charts in total. First we work the upside down version of the vine section again, working again in stranded Fair Isle, before working the central flower, which I would recommend working in Intarsia to avoid too many floats along the back of the work. Finally you work the reverse of the beginning chart, working again in stranded Fair Isle. Once you've knitted the panel, you will then Swiss down the bluebell buds on each side of the charts. Then finally you'll pick up the side edges in shade E to work the garter stripes at either side to finish the border. And this is the end of part 2. Come back next week for the final part where we'll be making the 2 remaining panels and bringing the whole blanket together.